Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Civilization, which is episode 9 of season 1 of Star Trek Enterprise. This video is a part of a series of videos determined by my user polls, where I review, Star Trek episodes determined by my user polls, and the episode that won my latest user poll for Enterprise was the first season episode, Civilization. So, Civilization is the episode where Enterprise, for the first time, encounters a new planet with a intelligent civilization of intelligent humanoid beings, and so Archer is eager to go down and explore, while T'Pol cautions that they be very careful not to interfere in the regular development of this pre-warp civilization. However, while Archer and the away team is on the planet, they discover evidence of aliens already arriving far advanced than these species and tampering with them, and apparently a lot of the native civilization become sick and dying from a disease that this advanced aliens have brought. So Archer teams up with the local scientist and forms a little romance with her, and together they're able to thwart these evil aliens and kick them off the planet. So, it's been a long time. It's been a long time since I covered Enterprise because, of course, I'm going through Star Trek in order, and I'm taking a little break between season 3 and 4 of Next Gen to do these polls, which is a nice throwback to that I used to do, and but it will be a while more before I actually get to Enterprise, so this is kind of a little different watching this episode way out of context. Also, having watched this episode just after watching season 3 of Next Generation, which in my opinion is the best season of the Star Trek franchise, not very flattering for this episode, shall we say. But that being said, look, and I've been on record many times saying that seasons 1 and 2 of Enterprise was a couple of my least favorite seasons of the entire Star Trek franchise. And it's not because they're offensively bad, or, it's more the fact that it's like a drain of creativity. It's a drain of anything original or new, and the characters are so flat and uninteresting, and it's just the pinnacle of boring. That being said, this episode actually isn't as bad. If I put it into the context of season 1, it's comes a lot sort of it's portrayed in a much more brighter light. It's because it's like, wow, this episode's not nearly as boring as some of the other episodes. And I remember when I first saw this episode, when it first aired, of not being impressed at all. But then a couple of years ago, when I did my season reviews of Enterprise and I watched Enterprise in order, I was pleasantly surprised by this episode, because I thought I really didn't like this episode. When I watched it, I was like, hey, this episode's actually pretty good. Now, I wasn't as impressed with this episode this time around, but as I think I can tell you right now what the difference is. The difference is, last time I watched it, I was watching Enterprise in order, and so I saw this in context. I had to sit through all the crap that's in season 1, or at least the first 8 episodes of season 1. Episodes like Strange New World, which I think is absolutely terrible, and Unexpected, which is, ooh, look, he's pregnant, and I don't know, whatever boring BS. And so this episode felt like a a breath of fresh air. It's like, this isn't nearly as boring or derivative or just drained of creativity as all that other stuff I had to sit through. But watching it this time around, after watching season 3 of Next Generation, as I said, my favorite season of the whole franchise, I'm like, this is a huge step down. But I try not to sort of judge this episode too unfairly. And that because I've watched a couple reviews for this episode, and they're definitely a lot more negative on it than I am. So if you think I'm being too negative on this episode, just keep that in mind. Because they were saying this episode was more boring than a lot of the Enterprise episodes. In fact, one of the reviews I watched was comparing it to the episode Breaking the Ice, which is one of my least favorite episodes of the entire show. I think it was in my top 5 worst because of the fact that it's boring. Well, and it portrays the Vulcans as dickheads and the crew as idiots, which is 2 major knocks I have against the first couple seasons of Enterprise. And so, yeah, I totally disagree with that. I think this episode's actually a step up from many of the other episodes in season 1. And so, when I first saw this episode, when I was first watching Enterprise, I was very disappointed and I was still kind of feeling this massive disappointment that the Star Trek franchise was going in this direction. And this leads to a larger conversation that I've had before, and I'll probably have again, about how people who say the Star Trek franchise, when it died after Enterprise and Star Trek Nemesis, they say, people had franchise fatigue. Even Rick Berman tried to play, people had franchise fatigue. In fact, I'm going to make a video about that whole topic and how there's no such thing as, not really, as franchise fatigue. It's a myth, particularly when it comes to Star Trek, because people did not have franchise fatigue. The writers had franchise fatigue, not the audience. The writing was derivative, devoid of any creativity, rehashing everything. In fact, it really feels like, and this, as I said, this episode is definitely not the worst example. This episode's okay. But it really, really feels like the creators of Star Trek Enterprise in season 1 and 2 had no reason to do this. They had no interest. They had no vision. They had no motivation to create these episodes other than to turn out more Star Trek to get the money. There was no creativity involved, and it was just a pale shadow of what Star Trek used to be. That's why the Star Trek franchise died. Not because people had franchise fatigue. That's bullshit. Had they released, and I'm sorry, had they fucking got Michael Piller back instead of Brennan Braga, who I love a lot of episodes Brennan Braga wrote. He wrote some of my favorite episodes in the franchise, but he is not a good showrunner. And he doesn't really understand Star Trek, which is, I think, made clear, not by the fact that he'd never seen the original series before joining Next Generation. Who cares about that? It's made clear by the existence of Enterprise that he doesn't understand the Star Trek franchise. So had they got, say, Michael Piller or Ronald D. Moore and to create a new Star Trek series rather than Rick Berman, who has no creative bone in his body, and Brennan Braga, who doesn't get Star Trek, then I dare say the franchise, no one would be saying this bullshit about franchise fatigue. The Star Trek would have been alive and well. It's the fact that they weren't putting out good Star Trek. Now, season 3 and 4 of Enterprise was good, but by that time it was too late. They had already hurt the brand name with seasons 1 and 2. And, of course, I also talked about that the reason why Enterprise was canceled had a lot more to do with politics and UPN than it did with franchise fatigue. Anyway, sorry. Sorry for the huge aside. But I think it's relevant when it comes to this episode. Because, yeah, I think this is kind of derivative. But at least that's the mindset I had. So it's relevant because this is the mindset I had when I was watching this episode when it very first came out. I was just utterly disappointed of the whole premise of Enterprise, the whole lack of characters, good characters, interesting characters, the whole lack of original stories, and it seemed like lack of motivation behind the creators of the show. They did not seem like they were actually, their heart was in it. It seemed like they were just putting out BS just because it was their job. And I would argue most of Star Trek is not like that. That even some of the bad episodes, you feel that their heart is in it, and that at least they're trying to create something original and new. And this just felt like bland and boring. And so when I saw this episode, my thoughts were, well, it's just more of the same. This is more BS, more bullshit. I hate the direction that they took the Star Trek franchise in. After Voyager, I wanted them to do another show set in that era, or go into the future and set a show into the future from that era, not go backwards in time where the technology was even worse and they didn't really have transporters, or, you know, that was like the concept I was least interested in. But that being said, and this is something else I talked about in other videos, that a prequel could have done right. So I wasn't closed-minded. My mind was open, and the fact the prequel could have been done right was proven in Season 4 when Manny Koto and not Brendan Braga was the showrunner, when the prequel to Star Trek actually felt like a prequel to Star Trek. Here, it feels like they're trying to be hard sci-fi. Now, sorry, getting huge, I always do these huge asides, but anyway, getting back to this episode. The reason why I like it better now when I'm watching as opposed to when I first saw it is because it's been decades since Enterprise came out, so I've already fully accepted that what the show is, what Enterprise is, regardless of whether or not I think they should have done it, regardless of whether or not I think it was good for the franchise. It is what it is. Whereas when it first came out, I was like, no, they're destroying my franchise. But now it's history. It's done. And I know what happened afterwards. After a huge long break, we get these cash grab reboots, shameless cash grab reboots. But then we get a lot of modern shows, most of them like a mixed bag, but then a couple of them really hitting and resonating, but taking Star Trek in a new direction. So this, it's all history now. So I can accept Enterprise for the show that it is. And when I accept the premise, which I don't like, but if I accept it as we're first humans into space, they come across this world, the first time they see an alien world that's like, you know, pre-warp civilization that reminds them of their past humans' history, and it's like traveling back in history. I can get with it a lot more because I'm not like burdened by the fact that, oh, they're destroying my franchise with this hard science bullshit that Star Trek never should be, because it is what it is. I've accepted after decades that this is, once I accept that premise and I feed into that premise, this episode's actually pretty good. As I said, especially if you compare it to some of the other episodes like Strange New World, which was terrible. That was just so derivative and unoriginal, and just, it was like someone took all the creativity and just took a straw, like sucked it all out and left nothing but a bland pile behind. That's how most first and especially second season episodes of Enterprise were. This one wasn't. This one actually poses an intriguing question of what it would be like to for the humans to discover, you know, for the first time come across a world that's inhabited with a pre-warp civilization. And one thing I will say has a huge positive, that this episode actually does a better job of exploring the awe in this scenario than any other previous Star Trek show. And a lot of that has to do with bigger budget, special effects, technology progressing. Because I'm thinking of episodes like Who Watches the Watchers, which I just reviewed, where they talk about the whole world being controlled by this new religion that they see Picard as a religion. However, on screen, we see 14 people and one building. Whereas here, we get to see on the view screen like this city, this lively city. And granted, it was probably, digital effects like video game effects that don't age as well, but it's still a hell of a lot better than what Next Generation or Deep Space Nine could do, to mention nothing about the original series. And they even zoom in to a sailboat going off in the distance. So it made you feel more like this was a real society rather than having 13 extras, the same 13 extras walking around the desert or Vasquez Rocks, because they always fucking go there. And one building. Here you get the sense, and I love that scene where they show that sailboat going off, and they're just as good once Riker, sorry, I'm still in the Next Generation mindset. Once Archer and T'Pol and Hoshi and Trip go down to the planet, you get the sense of they still do an amazing job of portraying this as a civilization, and because they did that wider vision of it, you buy into the fact that, and it looks like a village, they built a set of a whole village. It wasn't just one fucking building, it wasn't just 13 extras, and maybe it was, it just felt like more extras because they did a better job of making it feel more tangible. And so I will say something really bold, especially for as negative that I was on Enterprise at the start of this review. I'm going to go in the opposite direction and say something really bold, or at least some people might think it's really bold. I think this episode's better than the Next Generation episode First Contact, which I will be covering soon because I'm about to start season 4 of TNG after this review. I think this one's better. And as I will cover when I get to that episode, First Contact, not the movie, the episode, I think that episode's overrated. I don't particularly like it that much, and I have my issues with it. Most of all, I don't know. I didn't really buy into the premise of it. I didn't buy them as a civilization. It just seemed like a stand-in for modern-day Earth. Whereas here, I bought into their civilization. I bought into the facets. I bought into Archer, trying to save these people who are being poisoned. Yeah, it's so I thought this was a better episode, and also I like the interactions between Archer and Rian, I believe her name was. I think she was a very interesting character, and some people might not buy it, but I'm willing to buy it because it's more interesting narratively that she's really smart and she's really intelligent, and she doesn't question the fact that Archer's an alien. Eventually, once he tells her this and says that those other aliens are there messing with their planet, she buys it pretty quickly. Now, to be fair, a lot of her doubts could have taken place off screen because they cut, and then they cut to her being like, so let me get this, you're in the starship, so he tells her about it off screen, which I actually like. I think that was a smart decision because we don't need to see them, even though it's realistic. I feel like, especially because with the episode and the movie First Contact, by the way, with Picard, wowing Lily with the fact they're in a spaceship from the future, and many other episodes like Who Watches the Watchers and Justice, and many other episodes where we've seen this a billion times before, and that's something I just criticized Enterprise for doing. It's just repeating what we've done a billion times before. But here, they had the good notion to just skip right over that, have that take place off screen. We don't need to see the doubting Tom. And by the time we get back to her, she's like, okay, I buy it. And I've heard some people complaining about it. They're like, wow, she seems really accepting of this. Number one, she saw some futuristic shit. She saw Archer pull out a phaser, or phase pistol, sorry, and those other aliens fired disruptors at her and like vaporized shit, and the force field that goes. So I think that would change her. That would make her more accepting to this possibility, and also she is portrayed as a really smart cookie, and so I completely buy it. And I, furthermore, not only do I buy it, I think it's brilliant storytelling that they jump straight into her believing it. And so we skip over the whole doubting bullshit. It makes the story a lot more interesting. In my opinion, they can jump straight to her and Archer working together to try to stop these aliens. Which, by the way, I gotta talk about these aliens because I am a big Star Trek nerd, as you know, as you can tell by this YouTube channel. But even I don't catch all these tiny little references. And apparently, there was a reference made to the Malorians, whatever they're called, the aliens that appear in this episode. They were mentioned in the original series episode, The Changeling. They were just on a planet that Nomad destroyed. So their entire species was wiped out by Nomad. So the writers of the episode thought it might be a little cool if they throw in that sort of Easter egg to say, well, they're being dickheads here, but don't worry, they get their comeuppance in the 23rd century because Nomad will wipe them out. Which, yeah, I thought that was interesting. But anyway, so I like the portrayal of Rian as a sort of smart cookie, and I love how she sees past like Archer. Like there's this scene, and I did think it was a little cheesy when I first saw it, and to be fair, I still think it's a little cheesy to this day, but I like it a lot more just because I like how it portrays this character. But anyway, the scene where Archer's translator fails and she starts speaking her own language, and Archer can't understand what she's saying. So, I mean, she's speaking her whole language the whole time, but as far as Archer's concerned, she's speaking English, and then because of the universe's translator, but then it fails, and then he kisses her until he can fix the translator, and then he makes up some bullshit excuses like, oh, some people were walking by, and I just had to do that to distract them. And then at the end of the episode, he actually leans in to kiss her for real this time. And after he does, she says, oh, is your translator broken again? And he's like, I'm sorry, I don't understand a word you're saying. Which I've heard some other reviewers really hate that and talk about how cheesy that is. I actually like it. I'm going to be the oddball and defend that because... And to be fair, I thought it was cheesy too when I first saw it. I was like, oh, that's so stupid. But I've come around to that because it shows how clever she is and how smart she is and how she could see right through Archer's bullshit. In fact, when she first meets Archer and Archer comes up with this excuses to explain who he is, she sees through it immediately. She even has a line where when Archer says something like, I can't tell you that, and she's like, well, I guess that's better than lying to me again. Because she can always tell when he's lying, and that the fact that she could see through easily see through his bullshit about oh, these people were walking by, and tell that it was the translator that was broken. I thought that was cool. I thought that was actually clever. It portrayed her as a very smart cookie. And the fact that Archer didn't try to bullshit her again and just went along with it. It's like, oh, what? What'd you say? I don't understand a word you're saying. Like, that was actually a good moment. I actually like that moment. Now, I've come around to it. I don't know if people still think it's cheesy. Also, some people complain about the romance overall, but I actually didn't mind it because they didn't take it too far. It was just like this kiss is pretty much all we get from the romance. Other than that, it was just a team up of Archer like respecting this obviously super intelligent woman. And I like how Phlox even points out that, you know, she's intelligent, like that had she been born on Earth or on Vulcan, she could be like a full-on doctor, but it's just because she brought up was, you know, from a society that just so happens to be a bit more behind them, that she can only go as far as her society is, but independently she's a very smart person. I like that portrayal. I thought that was something very clever of this episode to do, and I felt like her character was explored, to be honest, a lot better than the characters in that First Contact episode. And it was just more interesting to me. And then the stuff with, you know, them teaming up to stop the aliens, and how they confronted the alien guy who was like, oh, I'm just an explorer as well. I got trapped here and I got taken by these people. But it turns out that they're using that world to manufacture weapons because it's cheaper to do, and they don't have to worry about, you know, the ill effects of harming people because they don't give a shit about these people, and they're too primitive to know what they're doing, and so they can do it under their nose. Which is really fucked up. And so I like how Archer is just like, I'm not going to stand for that, and we're going to do what we can to stop them, which is great. So I think that was a pretty good episode. So I do have to note, and this is season 1, so it seems like they can't get through a whole episode without making sure they portray Tucker as a complete moron, which is part of the reason why I don't like this character. Like, I don't buy him as a second officer who's a chief engineer because he has no common sense. He is a complete moron. And I've talked about one of my major complaints of Enterprise first 2 seasons is that it portrays them as incompetent, and to be fair, this episode doesn't, which is part of the reason why I like it. But it portrays Trip as incompetent because he has a dumb moment. Like, they just can't get through an episode without having at least one moment where Trip acts like a total fucking moron. And so the moment in this episode that I'm referring to is when the Enterprise is being attacked by that alien ship, and T'Pol's like, prepare to leave orbit, and Trip is like, what? You're not lying. Belay that order. You're not leaving the captain behind. And T'Pol, you know, ignores him. It's like, carry out my order, Mayweather. And then Trip like calls engineering. He's like, dump the core. We're not going anywhere. And T'Pol has to take time out and pat this little toddler on the head and be like, well, you see, Mr. Trip, what's his first name? You see, Charlie, the adults are talking now. And when I say prepare to leave orbit, it doesn't mean I'm going to leave the captain behind. I'm just doing this as a tactic. Pat you on the head. Now go back and stop having a temper tantrum, you complete fucking moron! Jesus Christ. I mean, I'm sorry. That moment really bothered me. I hate Trip. I just hate him. Like, nobody in Starfleet, especially the first ship, should be that fucking stupid. And the way he's like, oh, dump the core. He's acting like a toddler throwing a temper tantrum. Like, fucking trust T'Pol. She knows what she's doing. The adults are talking here. Just go back in your corner and eat your lollipop. Anyway. Anyway. So yeah, I think... I mean, the overall story of the episode is kind of simplistic. They visit a planet with, pre-warp planet, and they find some aliens there that are doing some nasty shit. They're like, Captain Planet villains and polluting them. Although, to be fair, they're not as cheesy as the fucking Malon were. But anyway, they find some aliens who are polluting and killing off a lot of these people that live there, and so Archer teams up with the local to put a stop to it. He forms a bit of bond with her, and then they part on good terms. I think that's a solid episode. It's not like amazing. It's not like what I would call it like a true originals great Star Trek episode, but it's solid. I think it's better than your average Trek episode. Now, some people complained about the fact that Rian was content to just stay on her world, even after learning about all this super sci-fi, futuristic shit. And she has to go back to using her Bunsen burners and primitive technology, and saying that, oh my God, she would be so unhappy with that. She should have actually went with Archer. But I get the impression that she didn't want to. That she, even though she was like impressed and in awe with, Archer's futuristic technology and, Enterprise and whatever, and she'd be totally awestruck to join them, I think she didn't want to leave her home. And I think she felt like she belonged at this world and didn't belong out there with a group of aliens, and that she would feel too isolated. And so I didn't have a problem with it. I actually kind of liked it. I liked that she stayed behind, and I liked that they parted on good terms. I thought it was a nice, warm episode. Alright, so I would now like to thank those that support me on Patreon. Is very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel, so I'll give a quick shout out to Antarius, Tatson, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Medijester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Migalasio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howells. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, "This is one of the best episodes of season 1. The scene when Jonathan Archer lost the ability to understand what Rian was saying. I know what happened. Sam Beckett leaped into Archer at that moment. I just checked the director of this episode. He actually directed an episode of Quantum Leap, The Color of Truth. I will never understand why Mark thinks season 1 and 2 of Enterprise is the worst seasons in Star Trek. The first 2 seasons of TNG felt like they were made by amateurs. When season 3 came out, they hired professionals to run the show. So Enterprise slaughters TNG for a production level. For storylines, they're both at the same level. So conclusion, and it's official, season 2 of TNG is the worst season ever in Star Trek. I would rather watch TNG's first 2 seasons than season 1 of Discovery, which I still haven't watched the whole season. My rating is 9 times I can't defend Trip out of 10. Yeah, you can't defend Trip in this episode because he's a moron. Anyway, I thought I was very clear in explaining whether you agree with me or not. I thought I was pretty clear in explaining why I don't like the first 2 seasons of Enterprise. They're boring. It seems like the writers weren't even trying. They're just rehashing everything that's been done before, and they're treating Star Trek like a hard science show, which it never was and never will be. It doesn't feel like Star Trek in any sort of meaningful way. And yes, the production values, they're definitely much better than season 1 and 2 in TNG. They had a bigger budget. But I don't think the stories are on par. I think what's different about season 1 of TNG, or season 1 and 2 of TNG compared to season 1 and 2 of Enterprise, is that they have interesting characters. From the very beginning, they created an interesting cast of characters who were pretty well developed, whereas the characters in Enterprise are pretty flat and boring. Just my humble opinion, of course. And as far as Discovery goes, Discovery is a mixed bag. And I would say that season 1 is probably my least favorite season of Discovery. And I am kind of curious to see what I'll think about it when I finally go back and rewatch it. But I don't think I wouldn't think it's as bad as the first 2 seasons of Enterprise or TNG. It's more of a mixed bag. But anyway, that's another topic entirely. Anyway, next comment is from Maddie Jester, who says, "This is an early Enterprise episode that I think fans sleep on and underappreciate. I see it as pretty good and not just another boring season 1 episode. General Order number 1 hasn't been established yet and makes sense that Enterprise would have to deal with these sorts of problems, a bit like Dear Doctor in that regard. I like the guest characters and the mystery is intriguing and doesn't drag and put me to sleep. Something other season 1 episodes couldn't manage. Cough. Desert Cross. Sorry. Let me try this again. Cough. Desert Crossing. Cough. Anyway, therefore, Civilization is a very respectable 8 out of 10 from me. Very respectable. Okay, so next comment is from Brandon Neilhouse, who says, "This is a good episode for Enterprise, but that's not saying much when it was done much better in the TNG episode Thine Own Self. But, being Enterprise, it had to add the hokey romance for Archer and the inevitably evil lizard people who are dumping toxic waste. Where are the Malon when we need them? Why is Rian so unfazed to meet people from other planets? I wonder what would happen if Hoshi had gone down alone, as was originally planned. Poor Hoshi, another character with wasted opportunities made redundant by the Universal Translator. How does Rian keep everything secret when the final fight takes place in broad daylight in the town square? I smirked at T'Pol flicking her hair over her ears to hide them. It reminded me of so many similar scenes in the Orville. 5 dodgy automatic translators leading to a passionate kiss out of 10. So, the thing with T'Pol flicking her hair over to hide her ears, that's dumb, because what if her ears poke out again? Like, that's not a good way. It seems like the doctor should have, when doctor was doing the cosmetic surgery to make them look like aliens, that he should have done something with her ears as well. Now, I'm not saying, I'm just saying, or at the very least wear like earmuffs or like a helmet. Like, that's what Vulcan, Spock, and Tuvok's done on a lot, where they just wear a hat. Anyway, because the thing with the hair is it could always just flop over and there you go. Your Vulcan ears are exposed. That's not a very good plan, in my opinion. Yeah, what else have we got? Oh, Hoshi going down to the planet by herself. I don't know. They did a terrible job of developing Hoshi's character, and I think had she went down to the planet by herself, it would have been boring. Now, that being said, they could have made her more important in this episode, but I don't think she was made redundant by the Universal Translator. I mean, kind of, sort of, but she had to, if you get it, this is something that sets it apart from other Star Trek shows, she had to program the translator first. She had to learn their language, or at least the basics of it, before the translator could get it. So she wasn't useless. Like, once it got to the planet, maybe she would, but she knew about like their culture and whatnot, and so she was still helpful. I don't think she was made redundant, but I do like, and this is like an advantage of taking advantage of the Enterprise early setting. I do like how the Universal Translator malfunctioned, and that even though it was an excuse to have the passionate kiss, it shows that this technology isn't quite there yet. It shows that this is sort of early days of it. Unlike in later Trek shows, the Universal Translator is just a BS excuse they came up with to explain why all these aliens they meet for the first time are speaking English. And it's just instantly so they speak English. And here, but so it's not really a device, it's more of a plot contrivance. It's more of a, an excuse to explain a plot hole. Whereas here, it felt more like a device. It felt like more of a tool, and it's could fail, and they had to program it. That's one thing I actually did like about Enterprise, or at least this episode. So another thing I wanted to bring up, before I get to my rating, is the fact that this episode was filming during 9/11. When 9/11 happened, they had to cancel production out of respect, and the director of this episode said that when they came back, that they could tell that the actors just weren't, their heart wasn't in it anymore, and they were just kind of going through the paces and reading the lines. And I've heard some critics or reviewers say that you could tell when watching this episode that they were just reciting the lines and they just weren't feeling it because they were too distracted by what happened in 9/11. And I think they're just projecting, because I think people do this sometimes. If they hear about a piece of behind the scenes information, they'll project that onto what they see, and they'll interpret what they're seeing to match with what they know now from the behind the scenes, because I don't see anything like that. Like, especially before I learned about this, I didn't notice anything about their performances being flat, or should I say any more flat than they usually are. Seem just as flat as they always are. Mind you, this is Enterprise. I think the guest actor did a really good job. I couldn't tell that. So, yeah, I don't agree. I don't think I can tell that they were noticeably affected by that. But that was an interesting piece of trivia. Anyway, so my rating for Civilization out of 10 is an 8, extremely good. Now, I'm being very generous here, and I'm kind of going by a sliding scale of Enterprise, to be fair. Like, I probably only liked the episode this much because it's, stands out from all the other boring cliche crap that season 1 and 2 of Enterprise had. But I'm in a generous mood because I think there are aspects of it I really appreciated. Like seeing the sailboat and making it feel like a civilization, and the character of Rianne, who I thought was well acted and a very interesting character, and sort of heightened the whole episode. And I think this is a good example of them showing what the first human Starfleet explorers would be like, them coming across the first planet. Whereas I think many of the other first situations they explore in Enterprise, like coming across a comet and doing a fucking snowman, is just boring. And so, I appreciate what they did here better. So I'm going to be generous and give it an 8. So that is it for my review of Civilization. So I will be back to covering Season 4 of TNG. So coming up next on my channel, this coming Monday, I'll be doing my video essay on the myth of fan entitlement and why it's dangerous. On Wednesday, I'll be over on Patreon for another revisiting my review for Family. That will be over on Patreon for my Patreon supporters. And then on Thursday, we'll be back on my main channel, getting back into Season 4 full throttle with the episode review of the episode Brothers. And then on Saturday, continuing with Season 4, I'll review the episode Suddenly Human. So that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out as I continue to do many more Star Trek videos and many more videos on other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.